I didn't know my relationship was about to be dismantled by a self-help book. Not by cheating, not by a screaming fight, not by some dramatic confession whispered through tears, but by a calm voice, a straight spine, and a sentence that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of a mirror. We need to talk about something serious. My boyfriend Ethan snapped his book shut with deliberate force, the sound echoing through our small living room like a gavel hitting wood. That's when I noticed the title printed in gold on the purple cover, Boundaries in Love, Reclaiming Your Individual Identity in Romantic Relationships. I should have known right then. My name is Claire. I was 31 years old, and until that moment, I genuinely believed I was in a stable, loving, grown-up relationship. 3 years together. 18 months living in that apartment on Sherman Street. Shared rent, shared routines, shared plans, or at least I thought we shared them. Ethan sat straighter than I'd ever seen him, shoulders squared, expression tight. He looked less like my boyfriend and more like someone about to deliver quarterly feedback. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said, about our relationship dynamics. My stomach sank. We've fallen into patterns that aren't healthy, he continued calmly. We're too enmeshed. That word hit me like cold water. Enmeshed. In 3 years, Ethan had never used therapy language. If something bothered him, he'd say we were getting boring or stuck in a routine. Not enmeshed. Not codependent. We live together, I said carefully. We share a bed. We split bills. Being close is kind of the point, isn't it? That's exactly the problem, he replied, his tone clinical. True intimacy requires individual integrity. I'm establishing healthy boundaries based on my core principles. The way he said it made me sound like I'd violated some universal law just by wanting to curl up next to my boyfriend after a long workday. What does that actually mean? I asked. It means I'm stepping back from automatic physical affection and from some emotional dependency patterns. I stared at him. 3 years of love. Of plans, of us. And suddenly, I was a pattern he needed space from. As he stood and walked toward the bedroom, his phone buzzed on the coffee table. I caught the name on the screen. Vanessa, his coworker. Recently divorced. Very opinionated. The bedroom door closed. His voice followed. Animated, excited, already reporting back. I sat frozen on the couch, the word boundaries echoing in my head. Because something told me this wasn't about growth. It felt like the opening move of a game I never agreed to play. Before that night, before the book, before the word boundaries turned into a weapon, I would have described my life as quietly good, not flashy, not perfect, but solid. My name is Claire, and at 31, I worked as a project coordinator for a mid-sized design firm. I wasn't saving the world, but I was competent, respected, and independent. I paid my share of the rent, I handled my own finances, I didn't need rescuing, and I'd never wanted to be rescued. I met Ethan 3 years earlier at a friend's birthday party, one of those crowded rooftop gatherings where everyone pretends they're not exhausted from work. He was standing near the railing, nursing a beer, talking animatedly about a marketing campaign gone wrong. He had that easy confidence, charming without trying too hard, smart without being condescending. We talked for hours that night about work, about travel, about how neither of us wanted kids yet but didn't rule them out someday. When he asked for my number, it felt natural, unforced. Dating Ethan was comfortable, in the best way. He remembered small things, how I liked my coffee, which songs made me nostalgic, the exact brand of pasta I refused to buy because it always turned mushy. He wasn't grand gesture romantic, but he showed up, consistently, reliably. A year and a half in, when my lease ended, moving in together felt like the obvious next step. The apartment on Sherman Street wasn't big. 1 bedroom, thin walls, a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people to cook without bumping hips. But it was ours. We split rent evenly. Split utilities, split groceries. I handled more of the cleaning. Ethan handled more of the maintenance stuff. It balanced out naturally. No scorekeeping, no resentment. Physically, we were affectionate. Not constantly glued together, but comfortable. A hand on my lower back while passing in the kitchen. Falling asleep tangled up without thinking about it. Kissing goodbye every morning. Emotionally, we leaned on each other. When I had a rough day, I vented to him. When he was stressed about work, he talked it out with me. I never once thought of that as dependency. I thought of it as partnership. His family liked me. His dad, Robert, was practical and kind. His mom had passed away years ago, but I'd heard enough stories to feel like I knew her. His younger sister lived out of state, but we texted occasionally. Holiday greetings, nothing intense. There was never pressure from his family. No passive-aggressive comments, no subtle digs, no "when are you getting married" interrogations. If anything, I felt safe. Looking back now, the signs didn't arrive as red flags. They arrived as whispers. Ethan started meeting his coworker Vanessa for lunch more often. She'd gone through a brutal divorce and suddenly had a lot of opinions about relationships. He'd come home repeating things she said, half jokingly at first. Vanessa says most couples lose themselves if they're not careful. She thinks people get lazy in long-term relationships. I brushed it off. Everyone has opinions. Everyone has baggage. I didn't realize that while I thought we were simply living our lives, someone else was slowly reframing our relationship as a problem that needed fixing. By the time Ethan sat across from me with that purple book, he wasn't questioning us anymore. He was diagnosing us. And I was about to learn how quickly love can be rewritten when fear disguises itself as self-improvement. After that first conversation, the apartment didn't feel the same. Nothing had technically changed yet, but everything felt slightly off, like furniture shifted an inch when you weren't looking. Ethan moved through our days as if we were still the same couple. He texted me good morning. He asked what I wanted for dinner. He talked about work, about deadlines, about meetings that ran long. But when I reached for him, physically or emotionally, there was a hesitation that hadn't existed before. The first time it happened, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. I came home late on Thursday, shoulders tight from a stressful meeting. He was sitting on the couch, scrolling on his phone. I leaned in to kiss him. He accepted it, but his body stayed stiff. No automatic pull closer. No hand on my waist. It was subtle, but I felt it. Later that night, when I slid closer in bed, he shifted slightly away. Not dramatically, just enough to create space. "I'm just tired," he said quickly. I told myself not to overthink it, but then came the language. We should be mindful of emotional enmeshment. I'm trying to be intentional with my energy. I don't want to default into patterns without examining them. These weren't things he'd ever said before, and every time he said them, it felt like he was quoting something rather than speaking to me. Vanessa's name kept coming up. She thinks couples confuse comfort with growth. She says women often give too much without realizing it. Women. I noticed he never said we. It was always theoretical, abstract, clinical. Meanwhile, the expectations stayed exactly the same. He still assumed I'd remind him about his dentist appointment, still asked if I'd coordinate weekend plans, still expected me to remember his sister's birthday and book reservations when friends visited. One evening, while folding laundry, I realized something that made my chest tighten. He wanted distance only where it benefited him. Physical closeness, optional. Emotional availability, negotiable. But the invisible labor, the planning, the remembering, the smoothing of life's edges, that was still my job. I tried to talk about it gently. "Can I ask you something?" I said one night, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "Of course," he replied, guarded but polite. "When you talk about boundaries, do they apply both ways?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, if you're stepping back from certain things for your sense of self, does that also mean we rethink how we divide responsibilities?" He looked genuinely confused, almost offended. "That's different," he said immediately. "Different." That word lodged itself in my chest. "How?" I asked. "Those are just practical things," he said. "Someone has to handle them." I stared at him, suddenly very still, and that's when it clicked. This wasn't about balance. It wasn't about growth. It was about control, wrapped in self-help language that made questioning it feel unreasonable. I didn't argue that night. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him of anything. But inside, something shifted. If he was allowed to redefine closeness in the name of principles, then I was allowed to redefine everything else. And for the first time since that purple book entered our lives, I stopped reacting and started paying attention. Thursday morning arrived with an unsettling normalcy. Sunlight filtered through the thin kitchen curtains. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Ethan moved around the apartment like nothing monumental had happened, as if he hadn't quietly redefined the rules of our relationship the night before. He poured coffee from the old machine I'd bought him last Christmas. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. Same routine, same mug. "Don't forget," he said casually, eyes glued to his phone. "We're meeting Vanessa and her new boyfriend Saturday night. Wine bar on Lammer Street. I told them 7:30. I froze mid-butter spread. "We're meeting Vanessa?" The woman whose voice had been echoing through my apartment walls. The woman who'd planted the idea that intimacy was a threat. I watched him stir his coffee, entirely at ease, while something sharp and clear settled in my chest. He wanted space from affection, but not from access. He still expected me to show up, to participate, to play girlfriend on command. I set my knife down slowly and met his eyes. "Actually," I said calmly, "I think I need to establish some healthy boundaries too." The spoon stopped clinking against ceramic. He looked up, confused, genuinely startled. "What?" "I need space for managing our social life," I continued evenly, "to maintain my sense of self. This is about my individual integrity." I used his words, his tone, his cadence. He stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," I replied. "I'm stepping back from automatic planning and organizational patterns we've developed." "That's not the same thing," he snapped. "How isn't it?" "Because those are logistical things," he said, frustration creeping in. "Someone has to handle them." "And someone has to handle physical closeness in a relationship," I replied quietly. "But you stepped back from that." His face flushed. "You're being ridiculous." "I'm being consistent." That's when his composure cracked. "But I need you to handle these things," he said, panic edging his voice. "I need structure." And I needed to not feel like a boundary-violating stranger for wanting basic closeness, I said softly. Silence filled the kitchen. He opened his mouth, closed it, then grabbed his mug and walked away. "This conversation isn't over," he called from the hallway. "You're right," I replied. "It's just getting started." Moments later, the bedroom door shut. I heard his voice rise, urgent, animated, already on the phone. "Vanessa." I sat there alone, heart pounding, but oddly steady, because I wasn't being petty. I wasn't retaliating. If Ethan wanted to redefine our relationship based on principles, then we were going to apply them equally, whether he liked the results or not. I didn't cry after that conversation. That surprised me. I sat at the kitchen table long after Ethan disappeared into the bedroom, listening to the faint hum of the city outside our windows, and tried to understand what I was actually feeling. Shock, yes. Confusion, absolutely. But beneath it all, clarity. For the first time since that purple book entered our home, I stopped wondering whether I was doing something wrong, because nothing about what I'd asked for was unreasonable. I wasn't demanding space from him as punishment. I wasn't withholding affection out of spite. I was applying his logic. That realization steadied me more than anything else could have. Later that afternoon, Ethan emerged like nothing had happened. He asked if I wanted takeout, if I'd seen his charger, if I could remind him about a work call. Each request landed differently now. "Can you order food?" "I'm maintaining boundaries around decision-making," I replied calmly. He stared at me. "Can you check the calendar and see if we're free next weekend?" I need space from scheduling to preserve my sense of self. Each answer was delivered without sarcasm, without raised voice, and with every response his irritation grew. By evening, it was clear something had shifted, for both of us. He wasn't used to resistance, not real resistance, not calm, grounded, non-emotional refusal. "You're punishing me," he accused during dinner. "No," I said quietly. I'm respecting your framework. That's not what I meant when I talked about boundaries. I know, I replied. You meant boundaries for me. That was the first time he truly looked unsettled. That night, lying in bed with deliberate space between us, I replayed the last 3 years in my mind. Had I overgiven? Had I made things too easy? I didn't feel foolish, but I felt awakened. I wasn't angry at Ethan the way I'd expected to be. I was disappointed. Because if this was about growth, he would have welcomed my autonomy too. But he didn't, which meant this wasn't about help. It was about comfort, his. And once I saw that, there was no unseeing it. I fell asleep not knowing how far this would go, but knowing one thing with certainty. I wasn't going to shrink to make someone else feel secure. Friday evening arrived exactly the way I expected it to, like a planned ambush wrapped in politeness. Ethan came home carrying takeout from an expensive Thai place downtown. That alone told me something was coming. We almost never ordered from there unless it was a special occasion or a negotiation. He laid the containers out with care, aligning them neatly on the table like visual aids for a presentation. We need to talk, he said. I sat down across from him, folding my hands in my lap. About what? This situation, he said, choosing his words carefully. Too carefully. What you're doing isn't the same as what I'm doing. There it was, the opening argument. Clean, rehearsed. What I established, he continued, was about emotional health, personal boundaries. What you're doing feels retaliatory. I almost smiled. So when you set boundaries, it's self-care, I said evenly. But when I do it, it's spite. Yes, he said without hesitation, because household planning isn't the same as bodily autonomy. My time and energy aren't part of my autonomy? I asked. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? He took a breath, shifting into the next talking point. Physical closeness involves consent and personal space. Logistics are just responsibilities of living together. And emotional labor? I asked. Remembering your commitments, managing your social life, that doesn't require consent? His confidence faltered. You're twisting this, he said. No, I replied calmly. I'm applying your logic consistently. The silence stretched. Finally, I said what had been sitting heavy in my chest all week. When did you start talking like this? His jaw tightened. When did Vanessa start talking like this? I pressed. That hit. His face flushed. He set his fork down. This isn't about her, isn't it? I asked gently. Because 3 months ago, you didn't think our relationship was unhealthy. You didn't think I was enmeshed. You didn't need distance. He didn't answer. By Saturday morning, the tension had evolved into desperation. He spent hours on the phone, pacing, whispering, stress cleaning the already spotless apartment. I heard fragments through the walls. He's being unreasonable. I didn't think she'd turn it around on me. Yes, I warned you. No, she warned you. Vanessa's voice echoed even when she wasn't there. Then came the pivot. I was thinking, Ethan said later that day, voice carefully neutral. We should have dinner with my dad tomorrow. I looked at him. Your dad? He mentioned he hasn't seen us in a while, Ethan said smoothly. I knew that wasn't true. I'd spoken to Robert earlier in the week. He hadn't said a word about dinner, but I recognized strategy when I saw it. Sure, I said. What should we bring? I already made his favorite cake, he replied quickly. That sealed it. This wasn't reconciliation. This was a setup. And as we drove to his dad's house the next evening, I realized something important. Ethan wasn't trying to fix our relationship. He was trying to win it back, on his terms. Dinner at Robert's house was supposed to be warm, familiar, safe. Instead, it felt like walking into a courtroom where I didn't know the charges yet, but I knew I was on trial. The house smelled like roasted meat and garlic, the kind of comforting scent that usually made me relax. Ethan's dad greeted us kindly, as always. No tension in his voice, no suspicion in his eyes, which meant whatever Ethan was planning hadn't started yet. We sat at the table. Plates were passed. Conversation flowed easily at first. Work, traffic, the weather. I watched Ethan closely. He was calm, polite, almost charming. Too charming. Halfway through the meal, he did it. I don't know what's going on lately, he said casually, looking down at his plate. Claire's been distant. The word landed like a punch. Robert looked up immediately. Distant how? Ethan sighed, the perfect sound of concern and confusion. I'm probably overthinking it. She just seems withdrawn, less connected, like she's pulling away. I felt my throat tighten. This was his move. Not confrontation, not honesty. Narrative control. I looked at him, searching his face for hesitation, for guilt. There was none. Is everything okay between you two? Robert asked gently. I opened my mouth, then closed it, because suddenly I understood exactly how isolating this could become if I reacted emotionally, if I sounded defensive, if I played into the role he was quietly assigning me. So instead, I breathed. Can I ask a question? I said calmly, setting my fork down. They both looked at me. If your partner told you they needed to step back from physical affection to protect their sense of self, I continued, would you think it was unreasonable for the other person to step back from planning and emotional labor to do the same? The table went still. Robert's brows drew together. Who said that? Ethan's face drained of color. He did, I said softly, 3 days ago. I laid it out. Not emotionally, not angrily, fact by fact, the book, the language, the boundaries, and how I'd simply applied the same principles to the parts of the relationship I'd been carrying alone. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, the silence felt heavy, but different now. Not accusatory, evaluative. Ethan, his dad said slowly, did you really think this through? Ethan tried to explain, tried to reframe, tried to soften. But for the first time all week, his words sounded thin. And yet, even as the truth landed, I felt hollow, because this wasn't a victory. This was the moment I realized how close I'd come to being quietly rewritten as the problem in my own relationship. On the drive home, neither of us spoke. That night, lying awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, I felt the full weight of it. Not anger. Grief. Grief for how easily love can be manipulated when fear is dressed up as wisdom. And grief for the version of us I wasn't sure I could get back. Monday evening, Ethan came home quieter than I'd ever seen him. No phone in his hand, no defensive posture, no rehearsed confidence. He set his keys down slowly, like the weight of them mattered more than usual, and sat on the far end of the couch, still respecting the space he'd insisted on creating. I talked to my dad today, he said. I didn't answer right away. I waited. He asked me a question I couldn't shake, Ethan continued, staring at the floor. He asked if I honestly felt mistreated by you before last Wednesday. My chest tightened. And? I asked. I said no. His voice cracked on the word. I've never felt neglected or controlled or taken for granted. I exhaled slowly. He said then I should ask myself why I was trying so hard to fix something that wasn't broken. Ethan rubbed his hands together, restless. He also asked where I got the idea that closeness was dangerous. I already knew the answer. I talked to Vanessa, he said quietly, and my sister. That stung, but not the way it would have before. They both kept saying the same things, he went on. That men need to be managed. That if I didn't assert control now, I'd lose leverage later. That comfort leads to disrespect. There it was. Not principles. Fear. I didn't want to end up like them, he admitted. Bitter, divorced, angry. They made it sound like relationships are power struggles, and if you don't protect yourself, you lose. I looked at him, not with accusation, but with clarity. So you tested me, I said. He nodded. I did. And when you turned it around, I finally saw how manipulative it was. His eyes filled, not theatrically, not strategically, genuinely. I'm sorry, he said, for using language like a weapon, for making you feel like wanting closeness was wrong, for trying to control the narrative instead of talking to you. I studied his face carefully. No deflection, no justifications, no but. What about Vanessa? I asked. I told her I'm not taking relationship advice from her anymore, he said. She got angry, said this was your fault, said I should make you choose between her advice and my family. And I told her not to call me again. That surprised me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because it showed intention. "I don't want to lose us," Ethan said softly. "Not over some game that was never about love in the first place." Something inside me loosened, not forgiveness yet, but possibility. That night we talked for hours, not about winning, not about being right, about fear, about expectations, about how easy it is to confuse strategy with safety. And when he reached for me, carefully, uncertainly, I didn't pull away. For the first time in a week, it didn't feel loaded. It felt honest. The fallout didn't come with yelling or slammed doors. It came quietly. Over the next few days, the people who had helped create the problem began to drift to the edges of Ethan's life, without me doing anything at all. Vanessa texted first. Long messages. Defensive. Accusatory. She told Ethan he was backsliding, that he was choosing comfort over self-respect, that I was manipulating him by playing the victim. He showed me the messages without commentary. Then he muted her. His sister called next, less aggressive but firm. "You're letting her undo all the progress you made," she warned. "Men don't realize they're being controlled until it's too late." Ethan listened, thanked her, then said something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. "This isn't control. This is partnership. And if that doesn't make sense to you, I'm not going to debate it." The call ended awkwardly. And that was that. No explosive confrontation, no dramatic ultimatums. Just boundaries. Real ones this time. Meanwhile, something else shifted. Ethan stopped assuming. He asked instead of expecting. "Can you help me plan this? Do you have the bandwidth for that? Is now a good time to talk?" And when I said no, sometimes simply because I was tired, he accepted it without resentment. Not because he was afraid to upset me, but because he finally understood that autonomy goes both ways. We revisited the week carefully, honestly. He acknowledged how close he'd come to rewriting our entire relationship around fear-driven advice, how easily he'd weaponized language meant for healing. And I admitted something too, that I'd been so used to being the emotional center of gravity that I hadn't noticed how heavy that role had become. Neither of us was innocent, but only one of us had tried to control the outcome. The purple book reappeared a few weeks later when Ethan was cleaning out his desk at work. He brought it home like an artifact. "I don't think the book is entirely wrong," he said, flipping through highlighted passages. "Just badly used." He was right. Healthy boundaries weren't about creating distance. They were about choosing closeness freely. We threw it away together. No ceremony, no symbolism, just done. And for the first time since that strange week began, our apartment felt like home again. 3 months later, Ethan came home with news that changed the tone of our lives in the best possible way. He'd been promoted, a real promotion, not just a title bump, but more responsibility, more trust, and a salary increase that reflected it. I hugged him hard, laughing as he spun me around the living room, the way couples do when joy feels too big to stay contained. We were stronger then, not because conflict had somehow improved us, but because we'd learned how easily fear can masquerade as wisdom if you let the wrong people narrate your story. A few weeks after that, while packing up his old files, Ethan found the purple book again, tucked behind a stack of notebooks. He brought it home and handed it to me. "Can you believe this started everything?" he asked, half smiling. I flipped through the pages, seeing highlighted sentences that once felt like threats. "Some of this isn't actually wrong," I said thoughtfully, "but it's meant to support a relationship, not control one." He nodded. "Vanessa made it sound like love is a constant power struggle." "Well," I said gently, "she's divorced." He laughed, for real this time. 6 months later, we moved into a bigger apartment. More light, more space. Not because we needed distance, but because we were choosing growth together. A year after that, Ethan proposed on a quiet weekend trip to the mountains. No scripts, no consultants, no principles to analyze. Just a ring, steady hands, and a simple question. I said yes. We got married the following spring in a small outdoor ceremony with our families. Ethan's dad walked him through his nerves beforehand, then gave a toast that stayed with me. The strongest relationships, he said, aren't built on strategies. They're built by two whole people choosing each other every single day. Vanessa wasn't there. Neither was fear. Looking back now, that week where everything nearly fell apart taught me something I wish more people understood. Self-help language doesn't equal self-awareness. Boundaries aren't tools for control. And love doesn't need to be managed. It needs to be mutual. Sometimes the worst moments don't break you. They show you exactly what you're made of together. And that knowledge, it's worth everything.